Right, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the fifth of the lectures, Roaming Around Stirling. Now, as before, I'm going to talk for, I think, 20 minutes, maybe 30. I'll try and avoid talking for 40 minutes, which I did during the 17th century Stirling, but that's quite a lot going on there. So, right, so roaming around Stirling. If we could start with slide 2, Ross. Right, now, just to show you two maps here. The map at the top left of your screen is the first map of Scotland. It is constructed on behalf of the Romans, based on the information of traders and spies from the 1st and early 2nd centuries AD. It's the Ptolemaic map. Basically, the more eagle-eyed amongst you should spot the problem with it. The Romans used contractors, and if you don't keep an eye on your contractors, they make mistakes. So, looking at the map, you can see Novantier, that's Dumfries, and then you can see Tazali, that's Aberdeenshire. So Aberdeenshire is to the south of Dumfries. Stirling is familiar, the kind of narrow bit in the middle. And what has happened here is the Greek geographers that constructed the map simply couldn't believe that anybody lived that far north. So rather than change their theories, they bent Scotland in half. So the map to the bottom right shows you kind of a rough transcription of the tribes. So the Romans knew a lot about Scotland. They'd been trading for 50, 60 years. Certainly they invade. Scotland, Caledonia as it's called, is invaded at least 5, 6 times, 7, 8. According to the records. Now, the thing is, there's not much written about Stirling, and it's all one-sided. While there are historical records, and these are brilliant, as I say, they're fragmentary, and reconstructing the history of Scotland during the Roman period from Roman resources is a bit like trying to reconstruct the history of both Gulf Wars from fragments of George Bush Jr.'s press releases after 2,000 years. So it gives you an idea just how fragmentary, how illusory the information is. Things written in Rome, in Constantinople, really, Scotland's at the end of the world. And one that comes through in this and becomes a trope for something far away, like we would use Timbuktu. So we imagine Timbuktu is just at the end of the earth, thousands of miles away, so Scotland too. However, the underlying geography of the Roman invasions was influenced, as everything in Stirling is, by the Fourth Crossing. So could we have slide 3, please, Ross? Now, this is Paris's 13th century map. Again, odd, but you can see the Roman walls there, the Hadrian's Wall, Antonine Wall. You can see the Forth. You can see something which is a vague approximation of Flanders Moss and the Clyde. You can see a narrow bridge connecting southern Scotland to northern Scotland, the only bridge displayed on the map. Stirling isn't described, Stirling Bridge is described. So for the Romans, for the Edward I, Edward II, basically for everybody who wishes to go north, the central fact about Stirling, about Scotland, you have to go through Stirling because of the Forth. Right. And slide 4, please, Ross. And of course, here we have the underlying geography. The pale green is dry ground. The dark green, 10,000 years ago, is underwater. Gradually, that water drains and the area is replaced by a bog. Now, it's not the impenetrable morass of legend, but it does restrict movement. It is very hard to get across. Now, Stirling coincides with both the shortest land crossing across this area, but also with the upper tidal limit of the Forth, and there is a ford at Cambuskenneth. There's probably not a ford at Kildeen, though lots of people talk about that. There is a ford at across the Forth Rip, and then there's a ford across the Teeth at Craigarn Hall onto the Keir Estate. These are probably the main ways north. There might be a ford across the islands at Kildeen, and one of those islands is, of course, the the inspiration for Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. Anyway, so that gives you a picture of the geography. The geography is all important. Right, so slide 5, please, Ross. Now, slide 5 shows the 3 major installations that the Romans erected in northern Britain. Starts with the Gask Ridge. Now, this runs from Doon in the south to the Tay. It gets the mineral wealth of the Ochils. It gets the great farmland of Fife and some of the farmland in Angus. But it's not really a defence. It's more a sort of a staging post. They intend to go further north. They construct that in the AD 80s under General Agricola. They abandon that after about 10 years, perhaps 20 at most. They fall back to the line of Hadrian's Wall. Then they build Hadrian's Wall. Then they push north to the Antonine Wall, 10, 20 years. Then they retreat to the line of Hadrian's Wall again. And all of this is to do with, well, certainly it's all to do with politics. The Gask Ridge is abandoned because there are bigger fish to fry on the Danube. The Antonine Wall is constructed because Emperor Antonine is a political victory at the start of his regime, and it's abandoned for the same reasons. There are problems on the Danube. Ultimately, Scotland is not worth controlling. There's not enough to steal here. The land is poor. There's not much mineral wealth, no cities, so there's no central tax. There's no central existing regime to be taxed. So ultimately, conquering Scotland isn't worth a candle. And raiders from Scotland raiding north through the 4th century lead to the formal abandonment of the Empire of Britain by the Romans around 410. Famously, Honorius writes the Britons and says to look to their own defences. And that marks the formal end of the Roman Empire in Britain. And really, the southern provinces are destabilised by raiding from what becomes Scotland. Caledonia here. Now, the people that are doing the raiding, and it's important to recognise this, this is anybody north of Hadrian's Wall, not just anybody in Scotland. These people are referred to first in 287 with an ethnic slur. Picti probably means horrible little painted pygmies. It's a derogatory term. And this means anybody north of Hadrian's Wall. Gradually, the Romans themselves began to describe it, refer to it solely for people in Scotland. And then eventually literate people round Inverness, no jokes please, read about themselves in Roman sources and says that must be us. So the Picti of the Roman period are not the same people as the Picts of the early medieval, the historic period. So Pict land, the Pictish kingdom, Pictish symbol stones. There's actually a discrete, these are 2 different peoples, 2 different terms. I'm quite happy to expand upon that in the questions. Slide 6, please, Ross. This shows some of the routes taken by the Romans. So importantly, they are getting to Murray just short of Elgin. Now the question is, did they went up that way on foot, and they may have come back on foot, or they may have gone down the Spey, or they may have been picked up in boats and sailed around the coast. Certainly they circumnavigated Orkney. There's Roman pottery in Garnesbroch, and also Roman children's toys on Skye, which is quite interesting. Now, each one of these marks the location of an overnight marching camp. So if we have slide 7, please, Ross. Now, across the empire, from Scotland to Israel, from Northern Africa to Germany, all Roman marching camps look exactly the same. They are a kind of a mobile tent city, a minimum of 1,000 people in each one of these. Everybody knows where they're going. You arrive and you know that you're going to dig the southwest corner of the ditch, and that your tent is going to be in the 3rd row on the left as you pass the Praetorium. Now, as I say, they're all the same across the empire. Some variations. So slide 8, please. This is one of the siege camps at Masada in what is now Israel. And you can see the bases of the tents, you can see the streets, you can see the walls, the defences. So this is contemporary with Agricola's invasion of Scotland. So a good example of what they look like on the ground. And if we have slide 9, please. This is an image from the film Gladiator. Just gives it, I think, a slightly better impression of what they look like. Slide 10, please, Ross. These are bread ovens from a Roman marching camp that I excavated up in Aberdeenshire, and it just shows you how the Romans cooked their bread. They're basically pizza ovens. You set fire, you warm up the stones, and you cook a bread ration on the stones when they're hot. Then you scrape the ashes out. And slide 11, please, Ross. This just shows them in action. Right. So just to return to that map, so slide 12, please, Ross. So just to remind you, I just want to make this point. This is a series of invasions. These are aimed at conquest. The Romans are interested in killing people and enslaving people who resist. But fundamentally, they want to trade. They want to create a consumer economy for people to buy Roman goods. So they move north. The idea is that you will be conquered. Yes, your dad might be sold into slavery, but you will be a Roman citizen. You'll buy Roman goods, and your children will serve in the Roman army. And we can actually map this over the first few people. So Calgacus, the first person in Scottish history, is a warrior fighting Agricola, whose fate we don't know. Argentacoxus, yeah, it's always tricky to say, is a later chieftain around the year 300. He is fighting the Romans, but signs a peace treaty and has what is probably Scotland's first dinner party somewhere in Perthshire. And there is some element of wife swapping at the party, but those that wish to look at the sources can look up Cassius Dio. Then the next person, the next man, there are some women, but the women remain unnamed. The next man is 50 years after Argentacoxus, so around 350. He is in Colchester. He is trading in Colchester. He's a wealthy man. He's bought a dedication to his grandfather. His name is Lossio Veda. Lossie, probably Lossiemouth from Murray. So he's moved all the way down. So we go from warrior to treaty to trade, all within a couple of hundred years. And that's what the Romans want to do, ideally. However, slide 14, please, Ross. If you cross them, you will suffer. And these are depictions of warfare. Oh, that was slide 13. Sorry, yes, I should be on slide 13. Sorry, people. Sorry, Ross, that's me. I'm jumping ahead of myself. You will see at the bottom left there is a ballista bolt there. So a ballista is a very large catapult. This was fired at Lecky Broch. Lecky Broch is the size of 2 transit vans side by side. If you can imagine the Roman army attacking and burning. Right, so slide 14 this time, Ross, please. This is known as the Fritzheim Dice Tower. This is found in, obviously, Germany. It's the only object in the world to contain the name Pict, and this is a dice tower. So soldiers put dice in the top, they came out and they gambled on the score. The Latin inscription is Pictos Victos Hostis Delta Ludite Secura. The Picts are defeated, the enemy wiped out, play without fear. This dates to the 4th century. This dates to when the Picts are causing lots of problems. Eventually, 367, we have something called the Barbarian Conspiracy, when a tribe called the Verturiones, who are probably the ancestors of the people that decided to call themselves Picts, ran all the way down as far as Norfolk, burning and destroying as they went. They capture a Roman official, they kill another Roman official, And this leads to 2 or 3 further invasions, but by the Romans as retaliatory invasions, but the cost of these invasions is ramping up. They're not able to beat the Picts, or the Picti as they've become, and actually gradually the cost escalates, and there are better places for these troops to be in the empire to finding something that's worth more. Now, if we go to slide 15, Ross. So what I'd like to do is go back to Agricola and Antonine in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. So there are, in the 1st century AD under Agricola, there are Roman forts to the north of the Forth, the Gask Ridge, all the way into Perthshire. In the Antonine period, there are Roman forts to the south. Now, the Antonine Wall shouldn't be understood as the actual boundary of the empire, merely a sort of customs post to the south of the border, and the border is probably to the north of the Forth, and it's just they fortify the line across Antonine Wall. Now, this means that all of those thousands and thousands of men need things. So they are, because of this interest that the Romans have in a market economy, what they like to do is use local suppliers in the hope that they actually stimulate interest in the Roman way of life, and they stimulate a Roman market. So grain, timber, cattle from Fife, Perthshire, Aberdeenshire, where in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD is travelling south to be consumed by the Roman Empire. So this is exactly what happens in the later medieval cattle markets. So there are cattle markets at Crieff, at Doon, at Falkirk, and of course the bull market's still in Stirling. Everything is being funneled through Stirling because of that crossing point. It's the only way you can get across the Forth Valley. Now, what happens is, if we have slide 16, Ross, is that the local people that are controlling this trade, that can navigate the roads, can navigate the crossings, get wealthy off their trade with the Romans and build brocks. So obviously we have Musa Broch here. Now the brocks that our early ancestors built are actually a bit scabbier. If we have slide 17, Ross. So this is Cold Oak Broch, just the other side, but you obviously had, there are others. Torwood Broch, slide 18, please, Ross. And this is a laser scan of Torwood, so the lighter colour are the highlights. So we have Torwood, we've got Lecky, we've got Clive, then we've got a series of other related structures. The fort at Moat Hill, the souterrain at Cowie, there's probably Demyat, we have Gallows Hill at between Dunblane and Bridge of Allen. A series of fortifications. They're different sizes, they're different styles, they've got different architectural practices. What people are doing is they're showing off, but they're showing off in a particular way. They're not showing off to the Romans, although potentially if you build a broch in southern Scotland, and a broch, of course, is predominantly associated with northern Scotland, are you making a statement about a non-Roman identity, a free north, a free past? Certainly, the brochs, the southern brochs, tend to be later and less well built. So perhaps people don't quite know how to build a broch. Anyway, so what is happening, if you imagine that you have a street full of people who are always rivals with each other. Someone buys a Lamborghini, someone buys a Porsche, someone else buys a Humvee, and all of the people who are helping the Romans to trade and to get across the Forth Valley are building differing forms of architecture. So yes, someone builds Torwood Broch, someone else builds Cold Oak Broch, someone else builds Demyat, someone else builds Moat Hill, someone else builds the souterrain at Cowie. They're all slightly different, but they're all fundamentally based on monetizing the trade with the Romans. Although strictly speaking, it's not a monetary economy, so it's more like an exchange economy. You help the Romans get 100 cows. They give you a big load of silver or gold or plates, and then you take that and you give that to people who follow you. Now, of course, depending what we want to view this, if we were to change the terms around, if instead of saying, you know, trading with the Roman Empire, we were to use things like the Nazis and Vichy France, you would see that the metaphor changes and the character of the individuals who are trading with the Romans changes. How do we feel about them? How did their cousins and brothers and neighbors feel about them? Very, very dangerous line. And remember, Lecky Brock is destroyed by the Romans, so it's entirely possible to fall foul of the Roman Empire. However, you will remember that I said eventually the Antonine Wall is abandoned and the retreat back to Hadrian's Wall. Now, if you're in the Antonine Wall, yes, you're going to get Fife. If you're in Hadrian's Wall, you will get cows from Dumfries, East Lothian, Northumberland. You're not going to get anything from Fife anymore. So the economy in Fife collapses when the Romans retreat to the south. And what seems to happen is that all of these souterrains, all of these brochs, all of these hill forts, from both Stirling into Fife and into Dundee, so all of that area, they are all abandoned at more or less the same time, and abandoned with a particular set of rituals. They're filled with Roman goods, they're partly dismantled, and then they're set fire to. And we find the same thing in the souterrains. If we have slide 19, Ross. So we have one souterrain in Stirling, as I say, at Cowie, tend to be in Fife and Perthshire and Aberdeenshire, and these are underground sunken storage chambers. So they should be roofed, and one end never sees daylight, so it's always at a constant temperature, it's always cool and dark, and these seem to be to store agricultural produce, and of course we think that trade with the Romans, and when the Romans abandon their markets because they retreat south, so the economy collapses. So we have abandonment of souterrains, abandonment of brochs, abandonment of hill forts. And broadly speaking, around 100 AD, there are something approaching 40 to 60 settlements, which we can probably be confident were broadly contemporary, broadly occupied, moved to 200 AD. So after the abandonment, we can spot one settlement that is still functioning. That one settlement is just to is West Caldock, it's called, and it's obviously sitting on the secondary, smaller crossing point at the Fords of Frew. The Stirling crossing point, obviously we have nothing 400, 500, but by 600, 700, we have the fortification at Abbey Craig. So a much bigger fortification, but actually the re-emergence of traditional power structure. However, that's the last slide. So 0.3 saw that all, of course, happy to answer questions. And if anybody wishes to email me about anything, I've added my mail at the bottom of this slide. Thank you very much, Ross.
Excellent, thank you, Murray. That was another brilliant, interesting lecture there. Certainly learned a lot. Just to let everybody know, I'm going to unmute everybody. So if I can ask you to give Murray a round of applause there, and I will unmute everybody now. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. What we'll do then, as always, is we'll open it up to questions. Stop share. That's what I'm looking for. So if I can look around the room, and if anybody has a question, can you please raise your hand and let me know. Sorry, I haven't seen any questions. Oh wait, seen one there. Terry, sorry. Oh, well,
Hi. You more or less solicited this question, Murray, but can you say a bit more about this business of there being Picts, as in Picts of this period, and the Picts we think of as like...
Yes, absolutely. This is a relatively new set of academic thought in the last 15 years. One of the problems is that around 1,000, lots of people begin to be defined by where they live. So Scotland and England, and we have the same with the Franks and the Huns, etc., as we move across Europe. So the first time Pict is used, Picti, Eumenius 287, it's a panegyric. So it's a kind of a mourning document about people raiding from outside the empire. It's an ethnic slur, and you can all think of ethnic slurs, but as I say, think about painted pygmy, something like that, something horrible. The equivalent for Britons is brutunculi, which is nasty little Britons. So we think Picti is a term of abuse. Now, importantly, it is applied to raid from north of Hadrian's Wall. So it could easily cover people from East Lothian, Geordies, people from Dumfries and Galloway, let alone the Picts. Now, thinking about the Romans and their failure to conquer Scotland when viewed from Rome and Constantinople, this becomes difficult to understand. Why did the Romans, why on earth was Scotland, what was so unique about Scotland? And as I said, the current thinking is it was simply the economics. There wasn't enough that was worth stealing. So what you find is that Picti, Caledonia become poetical tropes. So over the centuries, Picti becomes wilder and wilder and wilder. And whenever anybody wants to talk in the Roman Empire about the ends, the barbaric ends of the earth, Caledonia Pict becomes the place. Now, slowly but surely, as some writers gain more information about Scotland and the location of raiders, and we end up with Picts moving from being, kind of rotten Picti to the Picts in the Roman period, and we get a little bit more from the Romans, but between 200 and 600, no one in Scotland would have called themselves. And it's a bit like the current fascination of Wiccans to call themselves witches, and then looking back at 17th century Scotland and saying witches were persecuted, therefore Wiccans were persecuted. The witches persecuted in 17th century Scotland didn't exist in reality. Those witches are the witches of Macbeth, and to be a witch in 17th century Stirling was a bit like saying, I'm a paedophile. It is not something to be proud of. So no one in Scotland would call themselves a Pict. And we find as we move forward, we get Patrick's letter to Coroticus, king of Dumbarton Rock, talks about apostate Picts, but within 100 years, 150 years from memory, Adamman's Life of Columba is talking about the Picts. So 600, 700, the Picts have become a recognized people. There is nothing insulting about being a Pict anymore. And what we think are that the successor king, the successor tribe to the Verturiones from Inverness, a kingdom called Fortree, that they are looking to find out about their past. And of course, in a pre-Enlightenment period, the Bible and Roman sources are where you find out about things. And that information is taken to be, well, the gospel truth, no pun intended. So the Verturiones, the Fortree, kingdom of Fortree, read about raiders from north of Hadrian's Wall in Scotland who were called Picts, and they had this incredible, wild, barbaric reputation. So they said, that's us. And because they said that was us, they told other literate people, so the English, so Bede, for example, so the Scots, Adifman, and they said, well, these are the Picts. And it's in effect a rebranding for contemporary political purposes, if that makes sense. So the same thing would happen, the same thing happens any number of times. So Pickland becomes Alapa around 900, where the elite choose to abandon their Pictish identity and to create a Scottish-Irish identity. Then around 1200, as the Gaelic kings of Scotland become ever more anglicised, and I mean Norman and French here, so David I, Alexander I, William I, moving through to Alexander III, they're increasingly removed from their Gaelic origins, so they're French, and they start referring to the Kingdom of Alapa as Scotland because that's how the English referred to it, and they were reading English records because they were reading and writing in England. And the same thing happens. So Mormire, which is a Gaelic term for a great earl. So these are the earls. So the great earldoms of Scotland are originally Mormires. Mormire is probably a Dalriadic term. It gets adopted into Pickland, then it gets adopted into Alapa, then it gets translated into English, and it becomes Earl. So you can see that that names are mutable, whether you're speaking English, Scots, Gaelic. There's a transition, and there's always something about power within this. So, for example, there's an interesting thing with the Irish leader, the leader of the Irish government. We might call him the Prime Minister, they call him the Taoiseach. And if you call him, and what point are you making if you call him the leader, Prime Minister, or if you call him the Taoiseach? Sorry, a bit of a diversion there.
No, it was fascinating as always. Thanks for the answering the question. I've got a question in from Colin. Where was the Roman settlement in Stirling? And then we'll come to Jim.
Right, Roman settlement in Stirling. We don't actually know that there was. So there's no Roman military settlement. There's obviously Rough Castle at Falkirk on the Antonine Wall. We have the Doon Fort, but there's no Roman military installation in Stirling. We know that there are Roman period native sites, so Moat Hill, Kings Park, there's a fort on Kings Park. These are all small scale things, a bit like Brochs. They're occupied during the Roman period, but what we may have is that the Romans are in forts in Doon or in Rough Castle, and they're simply out patrolling. But at the moment, there is not, as I say, there's not a Roman military installation in the city at all. And yes, the nearest one, Menteith, has a couple of Roman military installations, the Antonine Wall, but nothing in Stirling.
Well, what you mean is we haven't found any evidence of that yet.
Oh, yes, hi Colin. I wasn't sure if it was you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. No, don't worry. I couldn't see your picture, so no, there's no evidence so far of a Roman military installation in Stirling. But that doesn't mean that there isn't one.
Yeah, but given the importance of the bridge, or the bridging point anyway, it seems highly likely that there must have been something.
Well. They're right. A slightly broader point here then is that the bridge is at Doon. So what that's suggesting is that the cross point is bypassed. So they're going, you must be going Drip Bridge and then crossing the Teeth somewhere. Now, are you crossing the Teeth at Doon or at Craigarn Hall? Certainly below the castle, there is clearly a ford bit that is likely to be the Roman crossing. Then another interesting. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And then another interesting point is that the early medieval religious structure, i.e. Dunblane, is not at Doon. So what seems to happen, I think in the prehistoric period, Stirling is the most important crossing. Then it shifts to Doon, to a crossing we don't quite understand. And then it shifts back to Stirling because we have Abbey Craig, which is early medieval. We've got the Dunblane Cathedral. We've got the relics of Blaine going to Dunblane. And there are no early medieval historical accounts associated with Doon in the same way that there are with Stirling or Dunblane. So we have Caddock visiting Stirling. We have Moena building a nunnery. And then obviously we've got the detailed records around Dunblane. A king of Scotland is assassinated there. The Vikings burn it. The Britons burn it. And the Britons, we think, here are raiding from Strathclyde. So there's more about Dunblane in the period, it's like 800 to 1100 than there is Stirling. 1100 forward, there's far more about Stirling. And I think that what we're looking at is some potential that perhaps Stirling is a no man's land. It's not firmly controlled. It's something that people basically just raid and raid and raid. The same thing happens to Stirling in the second half of the Wars of Independence after Bannockburn. Bruce basically abandons Stirling. The economy collapses by 60%. He builds Clackmannan Castle. He fortifies there, and I think he's relying on the Forth. So I think the same thing might be happening in that kind of 900, 1,000. But certainly everybody that's raiding, so Kenneth MacAlpin is raiding all the way through to Malcolm III, who's obviously David I's dad. They're all raiding south all the time, and it's important to basically, it's like a Viking economy. There's prestige to be gained from raiding England, and there's also money to be gained from raiding England. And Stirling is on the boundary with England in people's perception until the 15th century. Hence, the Stirling Borough Seal talks about brute Scots. So you wouldn't call Scots brutes if you thought you were a Scot.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem, Colin.
Excellent. We'll go to Jim, and then I'll come over to you, David. Okay.
Hello there, Murray. I'm enjoying your lectures.
Good, good, good.
I worked with David Woolliscroft and Birgitta Hoffman.
Yes.
At the Gask Ridge. In particular, I worked at, on the Institutional Roman Fortress.
Yes.
I did a lot of the geophysics, the resistivity, and I also did metal detecting. And the amount of finds I found there, I got 1 or 2 days that the SARS Club were up there as well. And the amount of finds we got was unbelievable. The condition of the finds was unbelievable. And for example, the coins we got, I got a few Republican coins on just in the perimeter of the Roman fortress. And finding the coins, as you know, Roman coins are able to be dated to the exact year.
Yes.
This enabled David and Birgitta to actually state the actual date, the year the fort was vacated and left, simply because the dates on the coins only reached a certain year. I read this in an actual book, and it stated this. This demonstrated to me the difference between the Scottish, the Picts, and the Romans. The Romans were able to, were using coinage 1,000 years before the Scots were using coinage. And, you were able to date something as old as that, whereas, anything that's found in Scotland that's been manufactured by Scots, you're guessing, is pure guesswork. I think it's a pity they vacated Scotland when they did, because I think we all had much better lives with the knowledge they had. Do you feel the same way?
Well, when it certainly, the thing is, we move into issues of what did we gain, what did we lose. Now, but for example, so on the Gasgridge, the fort at Braco, so the fort at Braco is the best preserved timber Roman fort in the world, right? Absolutely astonishing. Well worth going to have a look. The ramparts are incredible. And of course, the defences are stronger to the north. Now, if the Romans had stayed, that would be a city. And now, so without commenting on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, so because basically what the Romans do is they conquer, they build a fort. The fort has what's known as a vicus. The vicus is a citizen. Civilians gradually gain rights. I made a mistake there. Vicus has a legal status. There's an extramural settlement which becomes a vicus. The vicus then becomes a town. The soldiers and the civilians are buying and trading with the locals. You develop the farming economy. People become Roman. So all across Europe, places like Braco became cities. So Newcastle, Lancaster, Chester, Manchester, Carlisle, these are all cities that were built around a Roman fort. So if the Romans had stayed longer, Perth, where would Perth be? Perth would be at Braco. If you think that through. But then all of those forts, because there was Doon, there's I forget how many forts there are, 5 or 6, I think, on the Gasgridge. All of them would be towns and potentially cities. So the thing is that they never conquered us, not because we were indomitable, but simply because they couldn't be bothered doing it. And then the nature of the empire changed. So Honorius, who I referred to earlier, was actually a young emperor. I think he's a teenager, and quite cosseted at this point. The emperors changed their name, and he had a chicken called Britannia. And when he was told that Britannia had gone or all chicken, and he was really upset. So he didn't really care as much about the loss of the empire, because the empire was simply in a state of collapse at the end in the 5th century. And of course, that 5th century collapse of the Roman Empire, or the Roman provinces in Britain, so former Roman citizens, they're Christian, they're organized, they're civilized. The decline and collapse of their society in the face of pressure from Angles, Saxons, Irish raiders, Pictish raiders, is the source of the Arthurian myth cycle, which is ultimately about a Christian military hero leading a glorious but ultimately losing campaign to protect the dying of the light in the West against the barbarian pagan hordes. And the elves go to the West in the face of barbaric invasion from both men and Mordor. So they're big themes. As I say, you find them in Arthur, and of course the first person to be called Arthur is a son of Aidan MacGabrain, the king of Dalriada, who had, and he is known as the Prince of the Forth. and had a fortification at Aberfoyle. So a little bit more of a variant there, Jim. As always.
I could recall David Woolscoft, after he had finished his excavations for the year on the gas ridge. He used to, well, he was pally with a pilot and who had his own plane, and David used to go up north and be taking photographs of, you know, everything, you know, and he said that back then that there was a lot more Roman activity and forts and all, and you know, marching camps and all the rest of it to be found right up further north.
Yes.
That the Romans got a
absolutely,
lot further
absolutely.
up than, you know, what we realised at that time.
Yes.
You know. Anyway, thank you, Murray.
No problem, Jim.
Right, my son.
Awesome. If we can go to David, and then I've got a question in the chat from Maureen. So I've unmuted you, David. Please go.
Thanks. Hi, Murray.
Thanks for putting me right earlier in the week, actually, you know, because I was looking
that's
for
okay.
a potential
I was
Roman
quite excited
camp.
for a bit.
I know, yeah, because you can find it just straight on Google Satellite View. There's something that looks suspiciously like two sides of a Roman marching camp on the Kildene Loop. And it's where, I think, as far as we know, as close as we can gauge, to where there may have been a ford active during Roman time. Because clearly there's the Roman road leading into Stirling. We lose sight of that. And then what we pick up again is, I think, I don't know how well this is actually agreed by academics, that the Darn Walk was actually of Roman origin. Obviously, there's the camp up at the top of Dunblane. We used to live inside it. That's why there's Roman Way in Dunblane. That's the start of the Gask Ridge. So there's a gap between what we know, the Roman road coming into Stirling, and the Darn Walk, or at least the first of those forts on the Gask Ridge at Dunblane. So yeah, I got quite excited when I saw that, but you pointed out actually it's a drain. And the old map actually pins that down. But what, if anything, has been found between the potential crossing from Kildene and the camp at Dunblane in terms of actual archaeological evidence?
Right. Well, I suppose it's worth expanding on the nature of the camps a little bit. There are always there are basically two forms of Roman movement. So there's the invasion and the active campaigning. So those are the marching camps. Those are occupied at minimum for a day, perhaps maximum for a week. They move in the summer, so they campaign in the summer. And then there's the permanent installations, the forts, which have roads. So they certainly cross the ford at Craigarn Hall. So, and we know this because we've mapped the marching camps. So they are moving. Now, this is the campaign rather than the permanent installation. So they are probably going Falkirk, Stirling, and then Old Steeds, crossing over there, then going to Dunblane, then north. Now, the permanent installation that they make, as I say, is Doon. Then Doon is abandoned. Then you have the Antonine period, and then it's possible in the Antonine period there is there's definitely a second phase of road building during the Antonine period. And there is a stretch of road which is often argued to be Roman under the Barbush Quarry, which has been published. And there is 2 Roman coins, which would suggest that the Kildene Loop crossing was used. So 2 Roman coins. There's a Roman coin at the Cambusbarron Ford. But of course, the trouble is Roman coins aren't necessarily dropped by Romans. What they do demonstrate is that during that kind of broad Roman period, that every ford from Doon to Craigarn Hall to Drip to Kildene and Cambuskenneth was being used. If we look at the native fortifications, so there is over the Teeth, there's a vitrified fort. We have the Fords of Frew. So there's the Culdog Broch, and David and Jim was talking about the Birgitta and David Willis cross excavations at East Culdog, which again is the Fords of Frew. Then, of course, we have Moat Hill, Demyat, Abbey Craig. So that's the big crossing at Stirling. Possibly the Kildine one might be Gallows Hill, which sits in the Keir estate between Bridge of Allen and Dunblane. That's the only native site in Scotland to be associated with a Roman military rotary quern. So it's absolutely unique, never been excavated. So I think that there are multiple crossings. So the Romans will be using 2 or 3 of them, then changing their mind, then using them again. I think we have to look at the native sites and then the later, in the early medieval accounts, the hagiographies. And these tell us, obviously, that Stirling becomes the dominant crossing. And once it becomes the dominant crossing, you invest in it. Once you invest in it, it becomes even more dominant. And there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's an interesting map. If you look at a map of the earldoms, so Lennox, Menteith, Strathearn, right? And these have their origins in a pre-Scottish zone. These may be kingdoms. They may be originally kingdoms. It's not clear. They're certainly powerful, semi-independent nobles. If you look at the southern and southeastern boundaries of the earldoms, they have a big arcing bite out of them where Stirling sits. Stirling has to be crown property to control the crossing point. Now, we think it's probably crown property from maybe Malcolm III, certainly his eldest son Edgar. Then if you think about them, you get Alexander, who dies in Stirling. He, what does he do? He founds the Gildry. He founds a chapel in the castle, which is still there, the first chapel, the foundations of it. He dies in Stirling. David, of course, founds the borough, Cambus Kenneth Abbey, and the high school. So these early, the early Canmores, the Margaretsons, as they're called, are investing in Stirling to control it. So, and just to take a little step back, so I said that the core of the Pictish kingdom is Inverness. Around 900, there's a union between the Picts of Inverness and then the Dalriada. At that point, there's a shift, and this might coincide with the Vikings. There's a shift to Fife and Perthshire. And what we find is that, so Scone is a Pictish institution. And we know that Kenneth MacAlpin has a palace at Fortivia, which is at Perth. And then we know that Malcolm III founds Dunfermline Abbey. So the kingdom has shifted from Inverness and Argyll to Fife and Perthshire. Macbeth is the last kind of hurrah of the north, and of course he's a Murray-based king. It shifts after he's defeated. It shifts firmly south. Then David, Alexander, Edgar are shifting it south again to Stirling and Edinburgh. Remember, Edinburgh is really only Scottish from the Battle of Carroll, and then there's a shift in the later Canmores down to Roxburgh, because they keep trying to gain control of more and more of Northumbria, and they are shifting the core of the kingdom ever southwards. So that's why, if you think in terms of where Scottish kings are buried, lots are buried in Iona, then lots are buried in Dunfermline, and then there's a gradual breakup because the kingdom is getting bigger and bigger, and its focus is moving ever further south. I forgot to answer your question.
Well, you did
Somewhere.
cover it. You did cover it because it was about
good.
the archaeological evidence of Romans in that gap between Stirling and Dunblane. So
yes, so there's bits and pieces, but it's not a huge amount. But as I say, what you're really looking at are stray finds and native structures who are trading with the Romans. And really, Gallow Hill is the site we ought to dig, and clearly Damai it as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Yes, I think I've got another question here from Maureen Murray. I was asking if you can make a comment on the Roman road through Beechwood Park at St Ninians.
Yes, no problem. We know we can actually drive. You can drive along the Roman road at West Plean. It's the main road, and then it runs under the ground of the Granada service station. We lose it a bit. It's probably the main road through Milton, coming down, probably to. I think it bypasses Coxet Hill. There's a 17th century house called Williamfield, which is next to St Ninians Primary School, and it runs to the right of St Ninians as you're looking. Then it's hitting It's heading Beechwood Park, and then it runs from Beechwood Park to the entrance to Kings Park where the Redwood is. Now, what happens in Beechwood is that the Roman road is the main way into Stirling till about 1770. In 1770, Beechwood House is constructed, and when Beechwood House is constructed, the guy there wants to have a bigger back garden. So he moves the main road to the front of Beechwood House, which is where it is, and that's called, is that called Nuns? Can't quite remember the wee shop. In front of Beechwood House, so the road shifted, but you can still stand more or less on the road if you take the wee road, the wee lane from Torbrex past the high school, kind of towards Beechwood House. There's a little crossroads, and you're more or less on the Roman road there. The road itself survives, or its foundations survive, under about a metre under the garden soil at Beechwood. The reason it's so low is because there was, I think they imported soil and buried the road to create a better garden. And then, of course, the council got that as a municipal park, and I think they raised the ground again. But the road is definitely runs through Beechwood Park. And if I think about this, let me think. The best way to find it, one end is if you're looking in the middle of Beechwood Park with the high school to your right, and you look at the little residential terrace that's cut off at the end of Beechwood, the Roman road runs through that garden. Interestingly enough, one of the people that lived there was a minister who went down with the Titanic, and his family still live in the house, but he stayed on board to provide comfort. So very little aside there.
Really beautiful wee side note on that, Murray. Excellent. Are there any other questions around the room? If you've got to raise a hand or put it in the chat if you've got one. Yeah, Mike. Take it away.
Hey, hi Murray, how you doing?
Hi, fine, good to see you.
Yeah, it was just a question about the Roman Navy. I was struck when we went down to Cramond, outside Edinburgh, and there was a big Roman camp down there, big establishment down there. I know it's not Stirling or Perthshire, but and we do hear stories of the Roman Navy going way up in Inverness way, and I just wondered if you could shed any light on, been any actual evidence, of the Navy.
I suppose the evidence is circumstantial. So we know from Agricola's accounts that they circumnavigated the islands, that they received some kind of homage from kings on the Orkney Isles. as I say, we know there's Roman material in, there's an amphora in Gurnesbroch, and that has to be carried by boat. We know there is Roman material in Skye. Clearly, the Navy is providing troop movement and supplies. The Roman fort at Cramond is supposed to have been enlarged as a supply depot for the Severan campaign of the early 300s, 303, 304. And I think it has the largest grain store in Scotland. But I do know there is a guy. There's a new book just been written about the Roman Navy. I just bought a book about Septimius Severus's campaign in Scotland, and I know he's written what is apparently the definitive account of Septimius, the Roman Navy. Let's just see. Simon Elliott, right. Simon Elliott wrote a book called Septimius Severus in Scotland, the Northern Campaigns of the First Hammer of the Scots. It's okay, right? It's not as good as it should be. I think he has written a decent account on the Navy, but the best author on Roman military is Goldsworthy, Adrian Goldsworthy. And if you could get anything by him, that would be an excellent start. Yes, Adrian Goldsworthy's Roman Army at War is the definitive account, but I'm sure there must be other things about the Navy, but I've never quite read them. Yes. But I think Amazon just pushes these things. They're very good, but you're better. And I'm sure let me think through this. Lots of Roman academics have published lots of online bibliographies, so you don't get diverted into kind of things that are a bit too opaque. I mean, if you really want, I just saw some of this. I read this for my PhD. The Logistics of the Roman Army at War, 264 BC to AD 235, is the definitive account. It's by Jonathan Roth, but I see the paperback is £37 and the hardback is 176. So that's really good. Yes, that's excellent. But yes, no problem.
Thanks for that. I think we've got one more question, and then I think we'll probably call that time. We've got James. Would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like me to ask it, James? I see you here. But I'll just ask it. Did the Romans road travel 50 yards south of the Heritage Centre? Was evidence found of the ancient road there during a dig?
Say that again, Ross. You crackled a bit.
Sorry. Did the Roman road travel 50 yards south of the Heritage Centre? We found evidence of an ancient road there during a dig.
Ah, right. I wonder if this was Mr. Bain.
It is.
It is Mr. Bain. I was very excited when you told me that the first time, and I spoke to our friend Derek, and he says that there's no evidence of the road at all at the in any of the excavations at the Bannockburn Centre. Personally, I think the Ordnance Survey have got the road wrong there, and they've got it wrong because of the Borestone and Burns and Scots Way. I think the modern road is most likely to be the Roman road. The last time I spoke to Derek on this, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, he did say that he didn't think the road had been found at all.
struggling clicking on mute button there. Brilliant. So I think, is there any other questions? Just, I think we're there, but is there anybody got any pressing questions that I can see? Nope. Right, what I'll do is I'll, everybody that's still here, I will just unmute you all in a second, and if I can ask a round of applause for Murray, and
Thank you very much.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks very
much.
Brilliant. Enjoy the rest of your day, and remember the rest of the lectures coming up. The list is there, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Ross.
Take care. Thank you, Murray.
Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Right.